My parents laughed when I placed my battered red folder on the mahogany table at the reading of the will, but that moment was still an hour away. Right now, I was fighting a losing battle against the Georgia heat in a car that sounded like a lawnmower. The air conditioner in my silver Honda Civic gave a dying wheeze as I turned onto the pristine asphalt of Tuxedo Road. It was a sound I had grown used to over the last 10 years, but today it felt like a scream. The muffler rattled a protest against the oppressive silence of Buckhead. Driving that rattling 10-year-old car up the winding paved driveway of the King estate always felt like crossing into a different world. This was the house where I grew up, but it never felt like home. It was a showroom for the vanity of my parents. The massive iron gates loomed ahead. They were closed tight. Usually the sensor recognized family vehicles, but today the red light stayed solid. A new security guard I did not recognize stepped out of the booth. He looked at my rusted wheel wells with open suspicion. His uniform was crisp and tight across his chest. The name tag read, Officer Davis. He held up a hand to stop me, not even bothering to open the gate. "Deliveries are at the service entrance around the back," he said, waving me away like a fly. I rolled down my window, fighting the urge to scream. The humidity hit me like a physical blow. "I am not a delivery driver," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I am Zora King. Bishop Langston King is my father." Officer Davis looked at his clipboard and then back at my car with a sneer. "I do not have a Zora on the guest list, only family and VIPs today. And I have strict orders from the bishop himself. No unauthorized vehicles and absolutely no junk cars are allowed to mar the driveway. We have senators arriving soon." My grip tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Junk cars. That was my father speaking. It was his voice coming out of this stranger. "I am family," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave. "Open the gate." Officer Davis did not move. Instead, he placed a hand on his belt and walked around to the back of my car. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." "Excuse me," I asked. "Step out of the vehicle," he commanded louder this time. "If you claim to be family, you will not mind a standard security check. We have had threats against the bishop. I need to inspect your trunk to ensure you are not bringing in anything dangerous." I stared at him in disbelief. This was a new low. My father was not just excluding me. He was criminalizing me. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the humid air. My simple gray blazer and sensible shoes felt heavy. I walked to the back of the car and popped the trunk. Inside there were no weapons. There was only a spare tire and a box of files, my audit files, the evidence that would soon burn their world to the ground. Officer Davis rummaged through my things with deliberate slowness. I looked past him through the iron bars of the gate. I could see the circular driveway in front of the mansion. It was already filling up. I saw a brand new Bentley Continental shining in the sun. Next to it was a massive G-Wagon that still had the temporary tags on it. The contrast made my stomach turn. My family drove cars that cost more than most people made in a decade, yet they were drowning in debt. I looked at my rusted Honda. It was paid for. It was honest. I stood there in the heat and thought about the lie my family lived. They believed in the appearance of wealth. They chased clout. They needed the logo and the brand name to feel valuable. They did not understand that true generational wealth was quiet. True power did not need to scream for attention. My grandmother Beatrice understood that. She drove a Buick for 20 years while owning half the commercial real estate in downtown Atlanta. My parents were not building a legacy. They were building a house of cards. And they were terrified that someone like me with my cheap car and my forensic eyes would come along and blow it down. I pulled out my phone and dialed my father. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. I looked up at the house. I could see figures moving on the balcony. He was ignoring me. He wanted me to sweat. He wanted me to be humiliated by a security guard before I even set foot in the house. Officer Davis slammed my trunk shut. It rattled dangerously. "Well, the trunk is clear," he said, dusting off his hands. "But I still cannot let you in without authorization. You will have to park on the street and walk up." I looked at the long driveway. It was a quarter of a mile uphill. Walking up there in the heat, while the senators and deacons drove past in their air-conditioned luxury sedans, was the final humiliation my father had planned. Enough! I reached into my bag. I did not pull out a wallet. I pulled out a leather badge holder. I flipped it open and shoved it into the face of Officer Davis. The silver shield of the Forensic Accounting Division caught the sun. "Do you know what this is?" "Officer Davis?" I asked, my voice like ice. He blinked, looking at the badge, and then at my face. His arrogance faltered. "I am a forensic accountant contracted by the state," I lied smoothly. "I am here to conduct a review of the estate assets under a federal timeline. You are currently obstructing a government auditor in the performance of her duties. That is a federal offense punishable by up to 5 years in prison." I took a step closer to him. "Now you can open that gate, or I can call my supervisor and have a team of marshals remove you from this post." Officer Davis went pale. He looked at the badge again. He did not know that my jurisdiction was strictly financial fraud. He only saw the government seal and the word federal. The bully in him shrank away from a bigger predator. "I did not know, ma'am," he stammered. "The bishop did not say anything about an audit." "The bishop is the subject of the audit," I said. "Now open the gate." He scrambled back to the booth. His hands shook as he pressed the button. The massive iron gates groaned and began to swing open. I got back into my car. I did not look at him as I drove past. I kept my eyes on the mansion ahead. They wanted to treat me like a criminal. Fine. I would show them what a real investigation looked like. I drove past the valet stand where 2 young men in white jackets stood waiting. They stepped forward with practiced smiles that vanished the moment they saw the peeling clear coat on my hood. I ignored them. I did not want them touching my car, and I certainly did not want to pay $20 for the privilege of having them sneer at my floor mats. I navigated the Honda around the circular drive and tucked it behind a massive wall of manicured rhododendrons near the service entrance. It was a spot usually reserved for caterers and florists. It was fitting. To the people inside this house, I was just another service provider. I was the cleanup crew they did not know they had hired. I cut the engine and sat in the silence for a moment. The heat of the engine ticked and cooled. I took a deep breath. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was pulled back in a severe bun. My makeup was minimal. I did not look like a king. I looked like an auditor. That was exactly what I needed to be. I walked up the stone steps to the front door. I did not knock. I used the key Grandma Beatrice had given me secretly 10 years ago. It felt heavy and cool in my palm, a talisman against the monsters inside. As I pushed open the heavy oak doors, the sound of hushed voices washed over me. The air inside was freezing. It smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. I stepped into the grand foyer. My heels clicked sharply on the marble floors. The living room was to my left. I expected to see my family lounging in their greed. I expected to see champagne and celebration. But what I saw stopped me cold. My father, Bishop Langston King, was standing by the fireplace, but he was not alone. Sitting on the plush velvet sofas were 3 men in dark suits. I recognized them immediately: Deacon Fry, Deacon Mills, and Head Deacon Thorne. These were the pillars of the King Cathedral. They were the men who controlled the board of elders and signed off on the church budget. Their presence explained everything. My parents were not mourning alone. They were performing. My father stood with his head bowed. He held a handkerchief to his eyes. His shoulders shook with a theatrical sob. Deacon Thorne leaned forward and patted his knee with a look of profound sympathy. My mother Genevieve sat next to him. She was wearing a black dress that cost more than my car. She looked fragile and devastated. She was dabbing at dry eyes with a lace tissue. It was a masterclass in manipulation. They had brought the church leadership here to witness their grief. They needed witnesses to validate their devotion to Grandma Beatrice. They needed to cement the narrative that they were the loving children and I was the distant, ungrateful daughter. If I caused a scene now, I would not just be fighting my family. I would be fighting the entire leadership of the church. I would be the villain who disrupted a house of mourning. I stood in the archway and let my eyes shift. I turned off the daughter part of my brain and turned on the forensic accountant. I did not see a grieving home. I saw a crime scene. My gaze landed on the massive painting hanging above the fireplace behind my father. It was a chaotic swirl of red and black paint. It was signed by a modern artist I knew well. I also knew that the artist had been dead for 5 years and that the original painting hung in a gallery in New York. This was a reproduction, a fake. But I had seen the ledger entries last week. The church building fund had paid $85,000 for art and decoration for the sanctuary. That money had flowed into a shell company and purchased this worthless copy. The difference was sitting in an offshore account. It was classic money laundering, placement, layering, integration. I moved my eyes to the low table in front of the deacons. There was a crystal decanter filled with an amber liquid. My father was pouring small glasses for the men. Just a little apple cider to settle the nerves, Bishop Langston was saying, his voice thick with fake tears. Mother loved her cider. I stifled a snort. The viscosity was wrong for cider. The way it clung to the glass was wrong. That was whiskey. Specifically, it was a single malt scotch aged 25 years. I knew because I had found the receipt for a case of it in the trash bin of his office 3 months ago. $300 a bottle. The bishop who preached total abstinence from the pulpit was serving hard liquor to his deacons and calling it fruit juice, and they were drinking it too polite or too ignorant to question the taste. Suddenly, my mother looked up. Her radar for disapproval was sharper than any military sensor. She saw me standing in the foyer. Her expression did not change. The mask of grief remained perfectly in place, but her eyes hardened into diamonds. She stood up slowly. She excused herself with a weak wave of her hand and glided toward me. She moved like a swan, graceful on the surface but paddling frantically underneath. She reached me and pulled me into a hug. To the deacons, it looked like a mother comforting her child. But her grip was like iron. Her fingernails dug into the fabric of my blazer. "You are late," she whispered into my ear. Her breath smelled of mints and gin. "I had trouble at the gate," I whispered back. She pulled back just enough to look me in the face. She was smiling for the audience, but her voice was a venomous hiss. "Look who is here," she announced loudly, turning slightly to the room. "It is Zora. Finally." Then she leaned in close again. Her lips barely moved. "Do not ruin this, Zora. Do not say a word about your little investigation. Do not bore these good men with your math and your accusations. You sit down, you shut up, and you try not to look like a public school librarian." She smoothed the collar of my blazer with a condescending pat. "We have an image to maintain," she hissed. "And if you make your father look bad in front of the board, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your miserable, lonely life." She stepped back and wiped a tear from her cheek. "Go say hello to your father, baby. He has been so worried about you." I looked at her. I looked at the fake painting. I looked at the whiskey disguised as cider. I looked at the deacons who were watching me with judgment already clouded in their eyes. I smiled. It was the sharp, cold smile of a wolf who had just found the scent of blood. "Of course, Mother," I said. "I would not miss this for the world." The heavy oak doors to the study groaned open, breaking the heavy silence of the room. Mr. Harrington walked in. He was a man who wore his $3,000 suit like armor and his arrogance like a second skin. He was not just the family lawyer. He was the fixer for my father. He was the man who buried the bodies, metaphorically speaking, and made sure the King family reputation remained spotless while the bank accounts overflowed. He did not look like a man grieving a client. He looked like a man about to close a very profitable deal. He strode into the room, bypassing me completely, as if I were a piece of furniture that had been placed in an inconvenient spot. He went straight to my father, shaking his hand with a firm conspiratorial grip, then bowed slightly to my mother, kissing her hand with a practiced charm that made my skin crawl. "Bishop Langston. Genevieve," he said, his voice smooth and oily. "My deepest condolences again. It is a tragedy truly, but we must ensure her legacy is protected, just as we discussed." Only then did he turn his eyes toward the corner where I sat. He paused, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. "Zora," he said, his tone flat and dismissive. "I must admit I am surprised to see you here. Usually beneficiaries in your position prefer to receive the news by mail. It saves the embarrassment of a public disappointment. But since you are here, try not to interrupt. This is serious business involving significant assets, and we do not have time for emotional outbursts." He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, opening a thick leather binder with a snap that echoed in the silence. My family gathered around him like vultures circling a carcass. My father leaned back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. My mother sipped her drink, her eyes glittering with greed. Chloe and Dante huddled together, practically vibrating with anticipation. The three deacons sat in a stiff row on the velvet sofa, watching the proceedings with unreadable expressions. I, Beatrice King, being of sound mind and body. Harrington began reading from a document that looked far too crisp to be the will of a woman who had been bedridden for months. It was dated August 14, 2019. He droned on through the legal preamble, using complex Latin terms like per stirpes and in terrorem to confuse the deacons and make himself sound important. He spoke of testamentary capacity and fiduciary duties, weaving a web of legalese that was designed to intimidate anyone who might question the validity of the document. Then he got to the part everyone was waiting for: the assets. "To my son, Bishop Langston King, I leave the stewardship and full ownership of the King Cathedral properties, including the main sanctuary, the administrative buildings, and the television studio rights. Furthermore, I leave the investment portfolio held at Goldman Sachs, valued at $12 million, to ensure the ministry continues to flourish." My father let out a loud, theatrically pious shout. "Amen!" he cried, raising his hands as if praising God. "Thank you, Jesus. Mother knew the church was my life. She knew I would shepherd her resources for the kingdom." I watched him closely. He was not praising God. He was praising the bank balance. He cast a quick glance at the deacons, making sure they saw his devotion. Deacon Thorne shifted in his seat but said nothing. To my daughter-in-law, Genevieve King Harrington continued. "I leave the Buckhead estate, including all furnishings, art, and the vacation villa in St. Bart's. Additionally, I bequeath the jewelry collection stored in the primary vault with the exception of specific pieces designated elsewhere." My mother actually squealed, clapping her hands together like a child. She touched the diamond necklace at her throat, already calculating its upgrade. She looked at the deacons and quickly composed herself, dabbing at her dry eyes again. "She wanted me to have this house," she whispered. "She knew how much I loved this home." To my granddaughter, Chloe Harrington said, smiling at her, "I leave the sum of $5 million in a trust fund accessible immediately. I also leave the keys and title to the vintage Rolls-Royce and the collection of designer handbags stored in the climate-controlled archive." Chloe shrieked, kissing Dante on the cheek. "We are going to Paris, baby," she squealed. "First class all the way. We are getting that penthouse suite we looked at." Dante pumped his fist in the air. "Yes," he hissed. "Apex Tech is going to the moon." The celebration was crass. It was loud. It was entirely inappropriate for a funeral gathering. The deacons exchanged dark looks. They saw the greed on display. They saw the lack of humility. My family was so drunk on their sudden windfall that they forgot to keep up the act. Harrington cleared his throat, and the room fell silent again. He looked over the rim of his glasses at me. His expression was not sympathetic. It was mocking. And finally to my granddaughter Zora. The air in the room grew heavy. My father smirked. My mother swirled her drink. Chloe stifled a giggle. For Zora, who has chosen a path of humility and distance from this family, I leave my personal King James Bible. May you find the salvation and guidance in its pages that you could not find in this house, and may your prayers be answered for. That is all you shall receive from this estate." Harrington closed the binder with a final, decisive thud. For a second, nobody moved. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They waited for me to cry. They waited for me to scream. They waited for the reaction that would prove I was the unstable failure they had always claimed I was. My father reached under the table and pulled out a heavy leather book. It was the family Bible, the one Grandma Beatrice used to read to me when I was a little girl before everything went wrong. The cover was worn and the gold lettering was faded. He did not hand it to me with the reverence a holy book deserved. He tossed it. The heavy book flew across the room, landing on the marble floor with a harsh slap. It slid across the polished surface, skidding until it hit the toe of my sensible shoe with a dull thud. "There is your inheritance, Zora." My father laughed, a cruel, booming sound that he usually reserved for mocking sinners in his sermons. "Read it and weep. Literally. Maybe if you pray hard enough, God will turn those pages into dollar bills. But I doubt it. You need the guidance of the Lord far more than you need financial resources. Money is a tool for the righteous, Zora, and you have proven yourself to be a prodigal daughter." The room exploded with laughter again. Chloe was laughing so hard she had to wipe tears from her eyes, taking care not to smudge her mascara. My mother took a sip of her drink, hiding a smirk behind the crystal rim. But my father was not finished. He was enjoying his performance too much. He wanted to twist the knife. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a long leather checkbook. I recognized that checkbook immediately. My forensic eye zoomed in on the cover. It was from the First National Bank of Atlanta. It was the Pastoral Discretionary Fund account. I knew the routing number by heart because I had traced $300,000 of unauthorized withdrawals from that specific account just last Tuesday. It was money meant for the soup kitchen and the emergency shelter. He uncapped a gold fountain pen and began to write. The scratching sound was loud and deliberate in the room. He did not look at me. He looked only at the numbers he was scrawling, as if calculating the exact price of my dignity. He tore the check from the book with a sharp rip that sounded like a bone snapping. "You know, Zora," he said, waving the slip of paper in the air to dry the ink, "I am a man of God, and God teaches us charity, even when the recipient is unworthy, even when she has turned her back on her blood. I cannot have you driving around this city in that death trap of a car. It reflects poorly on the ministry. People might think I do not take care of my own." He stood up and walked around the table. He did not hand the check to me. He let it go. He dropped it from shoulder height, letting it flutter through the air like a dead leaf. It landed on the Persian rug, right next to the Bible he had thrown moments ago. $10,000. He announced, looking down at me with a sneer, "Take it, fix your car, buy some decent clothes, get a haircut that does not look like you did it yourself in the dark, and then I want you to leave. Do not come back for Christmas. Do not come back for Easter. Do not come back when you run out of money again. Consider this a severance package from the King family. You are no longer our problem." Dante chuckled from the sofa, swirling the ice in his glass. He leaned forward, his face flushed with alcohol and malice. "Better pick it up quick, Zora," he taunted. "The wind might blow it away. And hey, seriously, take his advice. Look at you. You look like an old auntie who lives with 12 cats. Go buy something that does not smell like mothballs. You are embarrassing, Chloe, just by standing there." Chloe giggled, holding her hand out to admire her ring again. "Bye-bye, big sister. Don't let the gate hit you on the way out. Oh, wait. You probably have to push your car through it." The disrespect hung in the air, thick and suffocating. They waited for me to bend. They waited for me to kneel. They wanted the satisfaction of seeing me lower myself to the floor to retrieve their charity. But I did not move. I did not look at the money. Instead, I looked at the audience. I looked at the deacons. Deacon Thorne was not laughing. He was staring at the check on the floor and then up at my father. His brow was furrowed. He was a man of tradition, a man who believed in the sanctity of family. Seeing a father throw money at his daughter like she was a stripper clearly violated his code of conduct. Beside him, Deacon Mills shifted uncomfortably, pulling at his collar. The cruelty was too naked even for them. My father had miscalculated. He thought he was showing strength, but he was showing tyranny. I took a slow breath, centering myself. I would not give them the reaction they wanted. I would not give them tears. I would give them consequence. I stepped forward. I stepped right over the Bible. I stepped right over the $10,000 check. I treated their money and their fake religion as if it were nothing more than trash on the sidewalk. I walked straight to the head of the table where Mr. Harrington was reaching for his coat. I stopped directly in front of him. I unslung the heavy leather strap from my shoulder. I placed my battered, worn briefcase on the polished mahogany surface. The sound was soft, a dull thud, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a gavel coming down. My parents stopped laughing. My father frowned confusion, clouding his arrogance. "What are you doing, Zora?" my mother snapped. "You have your money. Get out." I ignored her. I kept my eyes locked on the lawyer. I unzipped the bag. The sound of the zipper was a long, sharp tear that made Harrington flinch. "Do you think this is the end, Father?" I asked, my voice calm and barely rising above a whisper, yet carrying to every corner of the room. I turned to face him, my hand resting on the red folder inside my bag. "You think you can buy my silence with $10,000 of stolen church money? No, Father. This is not the end. This is where the audit begins." I reached into my bag and my fingers closed around the thick cardstock of the red folder. It was cool to the touch. I pulled it out slowly. The red color was vibrant and aggressive against the muted tones of the mahogany table. It looked like a warning sign. It looked like a stoplight. I placed it on the table and slid it across the wood until it rested right under the nose of Mr. Harrington. "Mr. Harrington," I said, my voice clear and unwavering, "you seem to be in a rush, but I believe you have forgotten something very important. You read the will from 2019, but you seem to have conveniently overlooked the addendum." Harrington froze. His hand hovered over his coat. He looked at the red folder, then up at me. His eyes narrowed. The condescension in his gaze was palpable. "There is no addendum," he said, his voice tight. "Your grandmother was not of sound mind to make changes in her final months. The document I just read is the final and legal binding testament. Any other scraps of paper you may have found are irrelevant." "Oh, but there is," I corrected him, a small, cold smile touching my lips. "And I think you know exactly which one I'm talking about. The one dated October 12th, just 3 days before she died. The one you tried to bury. Open the folder, Mr. Harrington." Mr. Harrington stared at the red folder as if it were a bomb counting down to 0. The arrogance that had coated him like cheap cologne just moments ago began to evaporate, replaced by a sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. He reached out a trembling hand, his manicured fingers hovering over the cover. He knew what he was looking at. He recognized the gold-embossed seal stamped into the heavy cardstock. It was not a forgery from a print shop. It was the official seal of the Supreme Court of Georgia, accompanied by the signature of a judge who had a reputation for eating corrupt lawyers for breakfast. "Open it," I said again, my voice soft but filling the room. "Or would you prefer I call the judge myself? I believe he is expecting an update on the execution of the Beatrice King Holdings Incorporation documents." My father slammed his hand onto the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "What is this nonsense? Rose King Holdings, there is no such thing. My mother left everything to me and Genevieve. Stop playing games, Zora. Mr. Harrington, throw this trash away and let us conclude this business." But Mr. Harrington did not throw it away. He opened the folder. His eyes darted across the first page, scanning the legal jargon that I had helped Grandma draft over endless cups of tea and secret meetings. I watched the color drain from his face, turning his complexion from a healthy flush to the gray of old ash. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "What does it say, Harrington?" my mother demanded, her voice rising in panic. She stood up, her bracelets jangling, and marched over to peer over his shoulder. "Why are you looking at her like that?" "It says," I interrupted, stepping closer to the table so I could look my father in the eye. "It says that 3 days before she died, Grandma Beatrice liquidated her personal ownership of every single asset she possessed. The Buckhead estate, the St. Bart's villa, the investment portfolio, the jewelry collection, even the land the church sits on." My father turned purple. "Liquidated. You are lying. We would know. We control her accounts. You controlled the accounts she let you see," I corrected him. "You controlled the decoy accounts. But Grandma was smarter than you gave her credit for. She transferred the deeds and the titles into a newly formed entity, Beatrice King Holdings, LLC. Mr. Harrington looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. He knew exactly what this meant. It meant the will he had just read was worthless. It was a piece of paper bequeathing assets that Grandma no longer technically owned. And I continued, pointing a finger at the document in the shaking hands of Mr. Harrington. "If you turn to page 4, section 2, paragraph A, you will see the designation of the managing partner." My mother grabbed the folder from Harrington, tearing the page in her haste. She scanned the text, her lips moving silently until she reached the name. She let out a sound that was half gasp, half scream, and dropped the folder as if it had burned her skin. "No," she whispered, backing away. "That is impossible. She would never. She hated you. She said you were a failure. She said what she had to say to keep you vultures away from her while she was dying, I said coldly. She played the part of the senile old woman because she knew if you realized she was lucid, you would have tried to declare her incompetent. She protected the legacy from the people who were trying to eat it alive. Read it, Mr. Harrington. Read the name of the sole executive and majority shareholder of Beatrice King Holdings. Mr. Harrington picked up the folder again. His voice was a whisper, a dry rasp that barely carried across the room. The sole managing member with full executive power and 100% ownership interest is Zora King. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Chloe stopped twirling her ring. Dante dropped his glass, the sound of it shattering on the marble floor, exploding like a gunshot. But no one flinched. They were too paralyzed by the sudden shift in gravity. The room had not changed. The furniture was the same. The expensive art was the same. But the air had shifted. They were no longer the masters of the manor. They were trespassers. Harrington slammed the folder shut. He regained his composure, or at least a desperate version of it. He stood up, straightening his tie. "This is preposterous," he announced, his voice shrill. Beatrice King was 89 years old. She was on heavy medication. She did not know what she was signing. "This is a clear case of elder abuse and manipulation. You took advantage of a confused dying woman, Zora. I will have this document thrown out of court before the ink is dry. I will have you arrested for fraud and forgery." My father seized on this lifeline. "Yes," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. She was senile. She did not know her own name half the time. "You forced her to sign this. You tricked her." I did not argue. I did not shout back. I simply reached into my bag and pulled out a silver USB drive. I walked over to the massive 80-inch television mounted above the fireplace, the one my father had bought with the youth ministry budget. I plugged the drive into the side of the screen. I picked up the remote control. "You claim she was senile, Mr. Harrington," I said. "You claim she did not know what she was doing. Let us ask her." I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The image was crisp and high definition. It showed my grandmother sitting in her favorite armchair in the sunroom. The date stamp in the corner read October 12, 2023. She looked frail, her body thin under her shawl, but her eyes were sharp. Sitting across from her was Dr. Aris, the most respected geriatric psychiatrist in Atlanta. On the screen, Dr. Aris adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. King, can you state your full name and today's date for the record?" "Beatrice Elizabeth King." My grandmother said, her voice clear and strong. "Today is October 12th, 2023. "Can you tell me who is the current president of the United States?" Dr. Aris asked. She answered correctly. "Can you tell me why we are here today, Beatrice?" "We are here because I am transferring my assets into a holding company," my grandmother said, looking directly at the camera. "I am removing my son Langston and my daughter-in-law Genevieve from my estate." Dr. Aris nodded. "And do you understand the consequences of this action? You are effectively disinheriting your son." "I understand perfectly," Beatrice said. "I am doing this because my son is a thief. He has stolen from the church and he has stolen from me. If I leave him my money, he will squander it on vanity and sin. I am leaving everything to my granddaughter Zora because she is the only one with the integrity to protect what I built." The room was deadly silent. My father stared at the screen, his mouth open. My mother was trembling. On the screen, Grandma Beatrice leaned forward. The camera zoomed in on her face. She looked straight into the lens. It felt like she was looking right into the soul of my father. "Langston," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that echoed like thunder. "If you are watching this, it means you tried to fight Zora. It means you tried to lie. You are my son and I loved you once. But you are my greatest disappointment. You chose greed over God. You chose gold over goodness. I am not punishing you, Langston. I am stopping you." The video cut to black. I pulled the USB drive out of the TV. I turned back to the room. Mr. Harrington stood frozen. His face was the color of chalk. The senility defense had just been destroyed by the deceased herself. He knew that if he took this to court, that video would be played for a jury. He would lose his license. He would lose everything. I looked at the deacons. Deacon Thorne was staring at my father with a look of pure horror. He had just heard the matriarch of the family, the woman who founded the church, call her son a thief. The credibility of Bishop Langston King had just evaporated in 60 seconds of video. The ambush was complete. I had not just brought a knife to a gunfight, I had brought a nuclear bomb. The silence following the video of Grandma Beatrice was heavy, but it did not last. The shock that had paralyzed the room began to wear off, and self-preservation kicked in. The first one to move was Dante. My brother-in-law jumped to his feet. He adjusted his designer blazer with a sharp jerk, as if the sheer price of the fabric could protect him from the truth bomb I had just dropped. His face was flushing a deep, angry red that clashed with his expensive silk tie. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his eyes bulging with a mix of fear and aggressive entitlement. "You have gone too far, Zora," he shouted, his voice cracking slightly. "You are throwing around wild accusations with no proof. That video is clearly edited. It is a deep fake. Everyone knows you can make AI say anything these days. You are just a bitter, lonely woman trying to tear down successful people because you cannot make it on your own. I will sue you for defamation. I will bury you in litigation so deep you will never see the sun again." I turned my gaze slowly toward him. He looked so confident standing there. He looked so sure of his own superiority. It was almost a shame to ruin it. Almost. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I just reached into the red folder and pulled out a glossy, spiral-bound prospectus. It had a sleek black cover with the words Apex Tech printed in silver foil. "Speaking of artificial intelligence, Dante," I said, my voice cool and professional, "how is the startup going? Grandma Beatrice was so excited when you pitched it to her last Christmas. She told me you promised her a 20% return within 6 months. She believed in your vision. She believed in you." Dante snatched the booklet off the table, clutching it to his chest like a life preserver. "That is confidential intellectual property," he stammered, looking frantically at the deacons who were watching him with deepening suspicion. "We are in stealth mode. We cannot discuss operations until the patent is approved. It is standard industry practice." "You would not understand, Zora. You are just a bean counter. We are building the future here. We are integrating quantum computing with blockchain ledgers to create a decentralized neural network." I let out a short, dry laugh. "Quantum computing with blockchain ledgers." I repeated, letting the buzzwords hang in the air like bad perfume. "That sounds very impressive, Dante. It sounds very expensive. But I have a question. How exactly does a decentralized neural network operate out of a damp basement in East Atlanta?" Dante froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I pulled out another document. This one was a commercial lease agreement. I ran a Dun & Bradstreet report on Apex Tech. I checked the state incorporation records. I even drove by the address listed on your invoices. It is not a laboratory, Dante. It is a rental house with boarded-up windows next to a liquor store. And according to the power bill, which I also have, the electricity usage is consistent with a single refrigerator, not a server farm. Chloe stood up, her hand going to her throat. Her face was pale. "Dante," she said, her voice trembling. "What is she talking about? You said you had 50 coders working in Silicon Valley. You said Google was interested in buying the algorithm. You said we were going to be billionaires. He lied to you, Chloe." I said, cutting through the sputtering attempts of Dante to interrupt. "Just like he lied to Grandma Beatrice. He convinced her to wire $5 million of her personal savings into your corporate account last January. He told her it was seed money for the next Facebook. He told her she was getting in on the ground floor." I pulled out a spreadsheet. This one was color-coded in neon yellow. It was a forensic cash flow analysis. "This is the financial soul of Apex Tech." I explained, tracing a line with my finger so the deacons could see the red ink bleeding across the page. "The money hit the account on January 15th. Now let us look at where it went, because it certainly did not go to software developers." I looked at Dante. He was sweating profusely now. The sweat was dripping down his forehead, staining his collar. "You want to talk about blockchain?" I asked. "Let us talk about the block of cash you dropped at DraftKings." I read aloud from the statement, my voice ringing clear in the silent room. "Transaction date February 3rd, $50,000 to DraftKings. Transaction date February 5th, $75,000 to MGM Grand Online. Transaction date February 10th, $100,000 to FanDuel." I flipped the pages, the sound loud and crisp. "Pages of it, Dante. You did not build an app. You built a gambling addiction. You gambled away the retirement money of my grandmother. You played poker with funds meant for her hospice care. That is a lie." Dante screamed, but his eyes were darting around the room looking for an exit. That was market research. We were testing the algorithm against the odds. It is part of the development phase. "Market research," I repeated. "Is that what you call it? Then explain this." I slid a credit card statement across the mahogany table. It spun slowly and stopped right in front of Deacon Thorne. He looked down at it, his face twisting in disgust. "October 15th, I read. "Amount $12,000. Payee, the Sapphire Gentlemen's Club in Las Vegas. The memo says tech conference registration." Deacon Thorne looked up at Dante. His eyes were hard. "I have been to Las Vegas, son." Deacon Thorne said, his voice deep and rumbling. "The Sapphire is not a conference center. It is a strip club." Dante turned white. He looked at Chloe, who was staring at him with horror dawning in her eyes. "And here is my favorite entry." I continued relentlessly. "October 20th. $200,000 wire transfer to Buckhead Imports. The memo says hardware acquisition." I pointed toward the window toward the driveway where the massive G-Wagon sat gleaming in the sun. "That is a very nice piece of hardware, Dante. Does the leather interior help with the quantum computing? Or is the heated steering wheel necessary for the neural network?" Dante collapsed onto the sofa, putting his head in his hands. The room felt smaller, tighter, as the walls of his lies closed in on him. Chloe looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were real. She looked at her husband, the man she thought was her ticket to a life of ease, and realized he was an anchor dragging her down. "You told me you sold your shares in your last company," she whispered. "You told me that is how we paid for the wedding. You told me you were rich. I was rich." Dante shouted, losing his composure completely. "I would have been rich if the market had not turned. If I had just hit one big parlay, I could have put it all back. I was going to pay her back Zora, I swear. It was a temporary loan." "So it is true." Chloe screamed, creating a sound so raw it made my mother flinch. "You stole from my grandmother. You lied to me. I married a fraud." "Technically," I interjected, my voice cool and clinical, "you married a felon. Because soliciting investment funds under false pretenses is securities fraud, and using those funds for personal expenses is wire fraud. And since he crossed state lines to go to those casinos, the FBI tends to get involved." I looked at the deacons. "I have already forwarded this packet to the Securities and Exchange Commission. They are very interested in his stealth mode." Dante looked up at me, his face a mask of ruin. "How much is left?" he whispered. I closed the folder. "Zero. You burned through $5 million in less than a year. You have absolutely nothing to show for it, except a leased car and a closet full of sneakers that the federal government is going to seize tomorrow." Chloe let out a wail of pure despair. She looked at her ring, the massive diamond on her finger. She realized suddenly that it was not a symbol of status, it was evidence. She had married a man who was not just broke, he was broken, and he had dragged her down into the abyss with him. Chloe wiped the tears from her face, but they were tears of rage now, not sadness. She looked at Dante, who was still burying his face in his hands. She looked at him with pure disgust. She realized that her husband was a sinking ship, and she had to cut the rope before she drowned with him. She stood up, smoothing her designer dress, trying to regain the pedestal she had stood on for 29 years. She turned that disgust onto me. "You are just loving this. Are you not, Zora?" She hissed, her voice rising an octave. "You have always been jealous of me. You sit in your little apartment doing your boring math while I am out there living a real life. I have influence. I have a brand. People look up to me. You are just trying to tear me down because you are invisible and I am a star." She tossed her hair back, a defiant gesture that I had seen her practice in the mirror 1,000 times. "I did not know about the gambling," she said, sniffing loudly. "That is on Dante. But my money is clean. I earned every penny in that trust fund. I am a self-made woman, Zora. I have built an empire on Instagram and TikTok. I have sponsorships. I have endorsements. I am a businesswoman." I looked at my sister, the girl who believed her own press release. It was tragic, really. She actually believed that posting photos of her latte was a job. She believed that the illusion she sold to strangers was reality. I reached into the red folder again, bypassing the legal briefs for a stack of credit card statements. They were thick, stapled together, and highlighted in neon pink. I held them up. Self-made. I repeated, my voice calm and low. Is that what you call it when you use the American Express black card of Grandma Beatrice to buy your audience? Chloe froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The defiance began to crack around the edges. I opened the statement. I walked around the table so I could show the deacons. I wanted them to see exactly where the tithes and offerings had gone. I wanted them to see the price of vanity. Page 4. I read aloud. Transaction date November 3rd, $5,000 to Social Boost Marketing. Purpose engagement inflation. I looked at Chloe. Engagement inflation, I said. That is a polite term for buying bots. I analyzed your follower growth, Chloe. On November 3rd, you gained 50,000 followers in 1 hour, and 98% of them originate from a click farm in Bangladesh. Deacon Mills leaned forward, adjusting his spectacles to look at the paper. He shook his head slowly. You mean to tell me she paid $5,000 for fake friends? Deacon Mills asked, his voice filled with confusion. She paid for the appearance of popularity, Deacon. I explained. She paid to look important. I flipped the page. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. And let us not forget the content. You claim to be a fashion icon, Chloe. You claim to be a trendsetter. But according to these charges from Rent the Runway and The Real Real, you do not own 70% of the clothes on your Instagram feed. I pointed to a long list of charges. Rent, rent, rent. You rent the gown. You take a photo. You send it back. But you are careless, Chloe. Look at these additional fees. Damage fee, cleaning fee, late fee. I read one specific charge. November 10th, Rent the Runway, $300 damage fee for red wine stains on a Dolce & Gabbana silk dress. You ruined a dress you did not own, and you paid for it with money that was supposed to go to the hospice care of Grandma. That is a lie. Chloe shrieked, her face turning a blotchy red. I am a brand ambassador. They send me those things for free. Brands pay me to wear their clothes. No, they do not. I countered, slamming the statements onto the table. You are stealing from an elderly woman to play dress-up. You spent $40,000 of the money of Grandma last month alone on appearances. You bought your fame, Chloe. You did not earn it. And you did it while she was lying in a hospital bed, wondering why her favorite granddaughter never came to visit. My mother gasped, looking at Chloe with a flicker of genuine shock. Even Genevieve had bought into the lie. She thought her daughter was a success. She thought Chloe was the one thing in this family that was actually working. Chloe looked around the room, desperate for an escape. She looked at the deacons, who were now viewing her not as a golden child, but as a spoiled thief. She looked at her husband, who was too broken to defend her. She looked at her father, who was staring at the wall, trying to dissociate from the disaster. It does not matter. She spat, doubling down on her delusion. I have millions of followers. I have sponsorships lined up. I am going to the Maldives next week for a luxury shoot. My travel agent already booked the first-class tickets. I do not need the money of Grandma anymore. I am going to be bigger than this family. I am going to be global. I smiled. It was the smile of a predator who had already sprung the trap. Actually, about that trip, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational tone. Since I took over the Beatrice King Holdings accounts this morning, I conducted a review of all authorized users. I noticed there were several supplementary cards issued to family members, cards that were being used for non-essential purchases. Chloe went still. Her eyes darted to her purse on the sofa. I called American Express at 8 o'clock this morning, I said, checking my watch. I reported the cards as compromised due to internal theft. I canceled every single supplementary card linked to the estate. Yours, Mom, Dad. They are all dead plastic now. Ping. The sound of a notification cut through the silence. It came from the platinum iPhone of Chloe sitting on the coffee table. The screen lit up bright and unforgiving. Chloe stared at it. She did not want to look, but she could not help herself. She picked it up, her hand shaking so hard the phone vibrated against her rings. What is it? I asked, though I knew exactly what it was. Is it your travel agent? Chloe read the screen. Her face crumbled. The arrogant influencer mask dissolved, leaving behind a frightened child. "It is a notification from the airline app," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Payment declined. Reservation canceled. Please provide an alternative form of payment immediately." She looked up at me, terror flooding her eyes. "They canceled my flight," she said. "They canceled the villa." "Of course they did," I said, closing the folder. "Because you are broke, Chloe. Without the credit line of Grandma, you are just an unemployed woman with a lot of rented clothes and a husband who is about to be indicted for securities fraud." I took a step closer to her. "You are not an influencer. You are insolvent. You have no assets. You have no income. You have $60,000 in personal credit card debt, which I also found. And as of this morning, you have no home because the lease on your downtown loft was also paid by the family trust, which I have just frozen." Chloe dropped the phone. It hit the rug with a dull thud. She looked at Dante. She looked at our parents. Her golden aura had vanished, stripped away by forensic accounting and a declined credit card. She was not the star anymore. She was just another defendant in the making. She looked at me, and for the first time in her life, she did not see the ugly sister. She saw the only person in the room who was telling the truth, but it was too late. The truth had teeth, and it was biting down hard. "M," she stammered, using the nickname she had not used since we were children. "M, please, you cannot do this. I have a reputation. If people find out my cards were declined, I will lose my followers. I will be a laughingstock." "You are already a laughingstock, Chloe," I said, cold and unyielding. "You just did not know it yet. You built a castle on sand, and you are surprised that the tide has come in." I turned to the deacons. "This is where the money went, gentlemen. It did not go to the poor. It did not go to the mission field. It went to buy fake followers and first-class tickets for a girl who has never worked a day in her life." Deacon Thorne stood up. He smoothed his suit jacket. He looked at Chloe with a mixture of pity and severe judgment. "The Bible says that vanity is a chasing after the wind." Deacon Thorne rumbled. "It seems the wind has changed direction." Chloe sank onto the sofa, burying her face in her hands. Her sobs were loud and ugly, filling the room with the sound of a spoiled reality crashing into the brick wall of consequences. She was not crying because she was sorry. She was crying because the party was over and the bill had finally arrived. My father, Bishop Langston King, watched his daughter collapse on the sofa in a heap of debt and humiliation. He watched his son-in-law weep into his hands, but he did not move to comfort them. He did not offer a prayer. He only saw the walls of his own kingdom starting to crack, and panic turned him into a wild animal. He straightened his spine, adjusting his collar until he stood at his full height. He was no longer just a father losing his home. He was Bishop Langston King, the man who commanded thousands every Sunday, the man who claimed to have a direct line to the Almighty. The transformation was instant and terrifying. He decided that if he could not win with logic, he would win with fear. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice dropping to that deep rumbling baritone he used when he was condemning sinners to hellfire. "You are playing a dangerous game, Zora." He warned, his eyes blazing with a mix of fear and righteous indignation. "You are attacking the anointed of God. Do you think you can steal the property of the church and get away with it? Do you think you can evict the servant of the Lord from the sanctuary he built with his own sweat and blood?" He stepped closer to me, looming over the table. "The scripture says, 'Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm.' God will punish you for this, Zora. He sees your greed. He sees your rebellion. You are inviting a curse upon your life that you will never be able to wash away." He paused for effect, waiting for me to crumble. It was a tactic that had worked on city council members and his own children for 30 years. He expected me to bow my head in shame, terrified of the divine wrath he claimed to wield. But I did not bow. I did not even blink. I just looked at him, feeling a cold, clinical detachment. He was not a prophet. He was just a man who used faith as a cover for felony. "You are right, Father," I said, my voice cutting through his theatrical pause. "God does see everything, and apparently so does the forensic audit team I hired 6 months ago." I reached into the red folder and turned the page. The sound of the paper turning was crisp and loud in the silent room. I pulled out a large spreadsheet, the columns color-coded in red and black, and laid it on the table. It was the financial soul of the King Cathedral stripped of its holy veneer and laid bare in cold, hard numbers. I did not look at my father. I looked past him to the three men sitting on the sofa. Deacon Thorne, Deacon Mills, Deacon Fry, I said, addressing them directly. You are the Financial Oversight Committee. You are the men responsible for ensuring the tithes of the widow and the orphan are used for the glory of God. I slid the spreadsheet toward them. Let us talk about the Children's Hope Fund, I said, keeping my voice steady. Do you remember the telethon the bishop hosted last Christmas? The one where he cried on stage and begged the congregation to give sacrificially for the new orphanage in Haiti? Deacon Thorne nodded slowly. We raised over $3 million in 4 hours. It was a miracle. It was a heist. I corrected him. My father slammed his hand on the table. That money was sent. He roared, his voice shaking the crystal glasses. It was wired to the mission field immediately. We have the receipts. You have receipts from a shell company in Miami called DK Consulting, I countered. I traced the wire transfers, Father. The money did not go to Haiti. It went to a Bank of America account in South Beach. And 48 hours later it moved again. I pulled out another document. It was a glossy bank statement with a logo that was not a cross, but a palm tree. It went to the Cayman Islands, I said, specifically to a private account at the Georgetown Trust. Account number 4592, ending in the name Darius Langston King. I pointed to the bottom line of the statement. Current balance $2,400,000. The room went deadly silent. The deacons leaned in, their eyes wide as they read the numbers. They saw the transfers. They saw the dates. They saw the theft. But where is the other $600,000? Deacon Mills asked, his voice trembling with betrayal. I am glad you asked, Deacon, I said. I pulled out 2 invoices stapled together. $300,000 was used for the down payment on the Bentley Continental, sitting in the driveway right now. The car, the bishop claims, was a gift from an anonymous donor. I looked at my father, who was now sweating so profusely that his silk shirt was clinging to his chest. And the rest. I continued, my voice turning sympathetic as I looked at my mother. This part is for you, Genevieve. My mother looked up from her grief over Chloe. She looked wary. The remaining $300,000 was paid over the last 12 months to a luxury apartment complex in Buckhead. I said, rent for a 2-bedroom penthouse suite, and there are also monthly transfers of $5,000 to a personal checking account in the name of Savannah Davis. My mother froze. Her face went slack. Who is Savannah Davis? She whispered. I looked at my father. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the floor, his defeat absolute. She is the 24-year-old choir director Father hired last year, I said. The one he has been counseling privately every Tuesday and Thursday evening. The sound that came out of my mother was not a scream. It was a gasp of pure agony. She had tolerated the greed. She had tolerated the lies. She had even tolerated the theft because she benefited from the lifestyle. But this was different. This was a betrayal of her vanity. You bought her an apartment, my mother hissed, standing up slowly. With the church money. With my money. My father tried to speak. Genevieve, please. It is not what it looks like. She is a troubled soul. I was ministering to her. You were ministering to her with a penthouse. She screamed. She lunged at him, her nails aiming for his face, but Dante held her back. I turned back to the deacons. They were standing up now. Their movements were slow and heavy. They did not look angry. They looked heartbroken. These were men who had served my father for 20 years. They had carried his Bible. They had defended his reputation. They had believed in the anointing. And now they saw the truth. They saw a man who stole from orphans to pay for a mistress and a luxury car. Bishop, Deacon Thorne said, his voice deep and final. My father turned to him, desperation in his eyes. Deacon, please. Zora is lying. She is possessed. We can explain this. There is nothing to explain, Deacon Thorne said. We have seen the numbers. We have seen the fruit. And the tree is rotten. He did not shout. He did not quote scripture. He simply buttoned his suit jacket and signaled to the other 2 men. We will be calling an emergency session of the Board of Elders tonight, Deacon Thorne said. You are suspended effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Do not come to the church on Sunday, Bishop. The locks will be changed by morning." My father gasped as if he had been punched in the gut. "But Deacon, the service. The people need me. The people need Jesus." Deacon Mills said quietly, "They do not need you." The three men turned and walked toward the door. They did not look back. They did not say goodbye. They walked past the weeping Chloe. They walked past the furious Genevieve. They walked past the broken Dante. They walked out of the house, leaving a silence behind them that was louder than any scream. It was the sound of judgment. It was the sound of an empire crumbling into dust. My father watched them go. His shoulders slumped. The air went out of him. The bishop was gone. All that was left was a thief who had been caught red-handed. He looked at me. His eyes were red. "You destroyed me," he whispered. "You destroyed your own family." "No, Father," I said, closing the spreadsheet. "You destroyed yourself. I just turned on the lights." The heavy oak doors clicked shut behind the three deacons, and the sound was like a vacuum sealing the room. The oxygen seemed to vanish. The pretense of civilization vanished with it. For the last hour, my family had played the part of the grieving survivors, but now they were just cornered rats, and rats bite when they are trapped. My father, Bishop Langston King, turned slowly from the door. His face was no longer the mask of a pious man. It was contorted into a snarl of pure, unadulterated hatred. He looked at the red folder sitting on the table. He looked at the USB drive still plugged into the television. He realized with a terrifying clarity that those two items were the only things standing between him and a prison cell. In his warped mind, he believed that if he could destroy the physical evidence, he could destroy the truth. He looked at Dante, who was shaking on the sofa. He looked at my mother Genevieve, who was vibrating with rage over the revelation of his mistress. "Get the folder!" Langston barked, his voice rough and unrecognizable. Dante looked up confused. "What?" "Get the folder, you idiot!" my father roared, pointing at me. "We cannot let her leave with it. We cannot let her give that to the police. If she walks out of here, we are all finished. Do you understand? You are going to jail Dante, unless you get that evidence." Dante stood up. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a desperate manic energy. He looked at me not as his sister-in-law, but as the obstacle to his freedom. He looked at the folder the way a starving dog looks at a bone. My mother wiped her face. Her makeup was smeared, but her eyes were cold. She was furious at my father for the affair, but her survival instinct was stronger than her jealousy. She knew that if Langston went down, the money stopped. The penthouse stopped. The lifestyle stopped. "Grab her!" Genevieve hissed, kicking off her expensive heels so she could move faster. "Do not let her get to the door." I sat perfectly still. I did not reach for the folder. I did not try to run. I watched them mobilize against me with a calm detachment that infuriated them. "You are making a mistake," I said, my voice steady. "Shut up!" Dante screamed. He lunged. He moved with the desperate speed of a man who saw his life ending. He scrambled over the coffee table, knocking over the crystal glasses and the bottle of expensive scotch. The amber liquid splashed onto the Persian rug, but no one cared. Dante was not reaching for me. He was reaching for the red folder. My mother was right behind him, her hands curled into claws ready to snatch the papers and tear them into confetti. My father blocked the exit, spreading his arms wide to ensure I could not escape. They thought they had the advantage. They thought it was 3 against 1. They thought physical force could erase digital footprints. As Dante reached across the mahogany table, his fingers inches from the red folder, I lifted my phone. It had been propped up against a vase of lilies for the last 20 minutes, facing the room like a silent observer. I picked it up and held it high. I did not press a panic button. Not yet. I simply turned the screen toward them. The interface was blue and white and very familiar. It was the Facebook app, but it was not my personal page. The banner at the top read, "The King Cathedral Official Page." Below the banner was a video feed. It was a live view of the room we were standing in. In the corner of the screen was a small red box with the word "Live" pulsing in white letters. Next to it was a number that was climbing rapidly. 52,412. Dante froze. His hand hovered over the table. He looked at the screen. He looked at the number. He looked at the comments scrolling up the side of the display so fast they were a blur of text and angry emojis. "Say hello to your congregation, Father," I said, my voice cutting through the chaotic silence. I tapped the screen to freeze the comments for a second so they could read them. "Thief." One comment read, "I gave my rent money to this man." Another said, "False prophet. Lock him up." "Where is the money for the orphans?" I looked at my father. He was staring at the phone as if it were a portal to hell. His face went from red to a ghostly gray. "I hacked the administrator password this morning at 6:00, I explained calmly. "I started the stream the moment the deacons walked in. Every word you said has been broadcast. Every confession about the Cayman accounts. Every detail about the mistress. Every threat. And now 50,000 witnesses just watched you order your family to assault a federal auditor." My mother let out a scream that was more animal than human. She threw her hands over her face as if she could hide from the 50,000 pairs of eyes staring at her through the camera lens. She stumbled back, collapsing onto the sofa next to the weeping Chloe. "No," she wailed. "Tell them it is a lie. Turn it off. Turn it off, Zora." But Dante did not back down. The revelation broke something inside him. He realized his life was over. The shame was public. The crime was public, he snapped. "Give me that phone," he roared. He did not lunge for the folder this time. He lunged for me. He vaulted over the table, his face twisted into a mask of violence. He wanted to smash the device. He wanted to smash the truth. He wanted to hurt me. I did not move. I did not need to. I had anticipated this. I knew that when greed failed, they would choose violence. As the shadow of Dante fell over me, I pressed the volume up button on the side of my phone 3 times in rapid succession. It was the signal. The heavy double doors to the library did not just open. They exploded inward with a force that shook the walls. The wood splintered around the lock. Before the hand of Dante could make contact with my skin, a blur of black motion intercepted him. It happened so fast that the brain of my father could barely register the movement. 1 second Dante was airborne, reaching for my throat. The next second he was traveling in the opposite direction. A man in full tactical gear moved between us. This was Marcus. He was 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle, and he was a former Special Forces operator I had hired specifically for this moment. He did not use excessive force. He used efficient professional force. Marcus caught Dante in midair. He used the momentum of my brother-in-law against him, twisting his arm behind his back and driving him face first into the Persian rug. There was a sickening thud as Dante hit the floor, followed immediately by the sharp metallic zip of plastic restraints being cinched around his wrists. "Stay down," Marcus commanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Do not move." 2 other men in dark suits and earpieces flooded into the room behind Marcus. They moved with the precision of a military strike team. They fanned out, securing the perimeter. One of them moved toward my father. Bishop Langston tried to step back, raising his hands in a pathetic attempt at defense. "Do not touch me," Langston shouted, his voice cracking. "This is my house. I am a man of God." The security officer did not care. He spun my father around and pushed him against the wall. He patted him down for weapons, his hands moving quickly and methodically. "Clear," the officer announced. My mother and Chloe were huddled on the sofa, screaming. A 3rd officer stood in front of them, his arms crossed, forming a human wall between them and me. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I looked down at Dante, who was groaning on the floor, his cheek pressed into the wool rug. I looked at my father, who was pinned against the wall, his face a mask of shock. I walked over to the phone, which was still streaming. I looked into the camera. "Thank you for watching, everyone," I said to the 50,000 people. "The authorities are on their way. Justice is finally being served at the King estate." I ended the stream. The silence that returned to the room was heavy and broken only by the sobbing of my mother. I looked at Marcus. "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "That was perfect timing." He nodded, his face impassive. "We have the perimeter secured, Ms. King. The police are 2 minutes out. We will hold the subjects until they arrive." I picked up the red folder. I picked up the USB drive. I placed them back into my battered bag. "Who are these people?" my father rasped from the wall. "You brought mercenaries into my house. I brought protection, Father." I corrected him. "I knew you would try to hurt me. You always try to hurt the things you cannot control. But you do not control me anymore, and you certainly do not control the narrative." I walked toward the door. I had one last thing to do before the police arrived. I needed to open the front gates. I needed to let the flashing blue lights in to wash this house clean. The sirens outside were not a warning. They were a verdict. The room washed in alternating strobe lights of red and blue, turning the pale faces of my family into ghoulish masks. The heavy front doors were thrown wide. A phalanx of uniformed officers streamed into the foyer, followed by agents in blue windbreakers stamped with 3 terrifying letters. IRS. Agent Miller stepped over the threshold, holding a warrant that looked heavy enough to crush a man. "Bishop Langston King." He announced, his voice cutting through the wailing of my mother. "You are under arrest for racketeering, tax evasion, and 18 counts of wire fraud under the federal RICO statute." The reality of the word RICO hit the room like a physical blow. This was not a white-collar slap on the wrist. This was organized crime legislation. This meant seized assets. This meant 20 years to life. My mother Genevieve finally broke, but she did not break with remorse. She broke with panic. She looked at the massive canary diamond solitaire on her left hand. She knew it was about to become government property. In a display of grotesque materialism, she yanked the ring from her finger. Her eyes were wild. She brought the jewelry to her mouth, trying to swallow the diamond to hide the asset inside her own body. A female officer lunged forward, grabbing her jaw with a gloved hand. "Spit it out," the officer commanded, squeezing the cheeks of my mother until Genevieve gagged and the ring clattered onto the marble floor, rolling away like a discarded coin. I turned my eyes to Chloe. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, dissociating completely from the chaos. She held a compact mirror in one hand and a tube of lipstick in the other. She was frantically trying to fix her makeup, trying to paint over the ruin of her face. Her hand shook so violently that she smeared a streak of crimson across her cheek like a fresh wound. "Put it down!" an officer said, spinning her around. Chloe dropped the lipstick as the cold steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She looked at the officer with genuine confusion. "But I am an influencer," she whispered. "You cannot arrest me. I have a brand. You have the right to remain silent." The officer recited, pulling her to her feet. My father was the last to go. He walked past me, flanked by 2 agents. He did not look at me. His head was bowed, his chin resting on his chest. The pompous bishop who had strutted through this house like a king was gone. All that remained was a tired old criminal in a wrinkled suit. Chloe saw me standing by the door, the red folder still tucked under my arm. She stopped fighting the officer. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and terrified. "Zora!" She screamed, tears cutting tracks through the smeared makeup. "Zora, please, do something. Help me. You are my sister. You can fix this. Please save me." I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had mocked my clothes and spent my inheritance on vanity. I felt a pang of pity, but I crushed it. Pity would not help her now. Only the truth would. I stepped closer to her until I was inches from her face. "I am saving you, Chloe," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. She blinked hope flaring in her wet eyes. "You are. You will tell them to stop." "No," I said. "I am saving you by letting you fall. For the first time in your life, there is no safety net. There is no daddy to make a call. There is no mommy to lie for you. There is just you and the consequences of your actions." I leaned in closer, so only she could hear. "The prison guards will not care about your follower count, Chloe. They will not care about your brand. You are going to have to learn how to survive as a human being, not as an image. You are going to learn independence in that cell, and that is the most valuable gift I could ever give you." The officer pulled her away. She screamed my name, a raw sound of betrayal and terror. But I did not look back. I walked out onto the porch and breathed in the cool night air. The nightmare was over. The waking up had just begun. 1 month later, the silence in the estate was no longer heavy or oppressive. It felt like a deep breath after a long run. I sat in the high-backed leather chair behind the desk of Grandma Beatrice, the afternoon sun warming the polished wood surface. The house was quiet. The forensic auditors had finished their work packing away the evidence of the crimes of my father into neat cardboard boxes. In the center of the desk sat the wooden box. It was simple, made of scratched oak with brass hinges. The same box my father had kicked across the floor during the reading of the will. The same box Dante had laughed at, calling it trash. They had been so blinded by their greed that they never bothered to look inside. They saw a container for a Bible and assumed it was worthless. I lifted the latch. The hinges creaked softly. Inside rested the old leather Bible, just as Mr. Harrington had said. But I knew my grandmother better than that. Grandma Beatrice never did anything without a second layer of meaning. I lifted the Bible out and set it aside. The box looked empty, but the depth was wrong. I pressed my thumb against the corner of the velvet lining and felt a click. A false bottom popped up, revealing a stack of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. My hands trembled as I opened the first letter. The handwriting was spidery and elegant. "My dearest Zora," it began, "I am writing this because today I saw your mother make you sleep in the guest room while Chloe took the master suite." I wanted to scream, but I decided to play the fool. I decided to let them think they were winning so I could keep you close. The letters were a chronicle of my life seen through her eyes. She had seen every slight and every insult. "Do you remember the game we used to play?" she wrote in another letter. "The one where we looked at grocery receipts and you had to find the mistake. I was not just keeping you occupied, Zora. I was teaching you to audit. I was teaching you that numbers tell a story that people try to hide." I laughed through my tears, a watery sound in the quiet room. I remembered that game. I thought it was a puzzle. I did not realize it was training. She had groomed me not to be a socialite or a trophy wife, but to be a guardian. She knew my father was a thief. She knew my mother was a spender. She knew that one day the wolves would come for the estate, and she knew she would not be there to stop them. So she raised a wolf of her own. "You were never the black sheep, Zora," she wrote in the final note, dated 3 days before she died. "You were the shepherd." I lowered the letter to the desk, my heart full. I placed the letters back in the box and closed the lid. I was not just Zora King the outcast anymore. I was Zora King, the CEO, the protector, the legacy. I drove my new car to the quiet cemetery on the hill. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I placed a bouquet of white roses on the marble headstone right next to the simple wooden box I had buried there the day before. I traced the letters of her name with my finger, feeling the cool stone beneath my skin. "I did it, Grandma," I whispered into the evening air. "The accounts are balanced. The ledger is clean." I walked back to my car feeling lighter than I ever had in my life. I started the engine and pulled onto the highway, heading west toward the horizon, where the sun was dipping below the edge of the world. I was no longer the invisible daughter or the family disappointment. I was Zora King, and my life was finally my own. This story is a powerful reminder that being underestimated is a strategic advantage, not a weakness. While the family focused on the appearance of wealth, designer clothes, luxury cars, and social status, they neglected the substance of character and integrity. They mistook silence for submission and kindness for stupidity. True power doesn't scream, it plans. In a world obsessed with clout and instant gratification, the real legacy belongs to those who do the work, master their craft, and protect their truth. Blood may make you related, but only loyalty and respect make you family. Success is the best revenge, but justice is the ultimate closure.